Hey, it's Jesse from the Biggest Guys Locker Room. You guys ever thought about starting your own podcast? Whether it be for business, personal, or simply talking about the things you love? Well, I can honestly say when we started our podcast, it was the best decision and it's the most fun we've ever had. But starting a new podcast can be overwhelming at times. And that's where Buzzsprout comes in. Buzzsprout is the best way to start your own professional podcast. They're so good, they've already helped out over 100,000 podcasters get their message out to the world. Buzzsprout offers you so many tools, like a great-looking podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, and tools to promote your episodes, and more and more and more. Buzzsprout even gets your show listed on every major podcast platform, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. They provide so many tools to help you get started with tutorials on YouTube, podcast tutorials, everything you may need to get your journey started. So if you're looking to start your professional podcast today, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you and help support our show. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start a podcast. All right, welcome back to the Biggest Guys Locker Room. I'm your host, Jesse, and once again, we are celebrating Week 5, guys. Football is in full force this week. We're going to start with some injury news. First off, we're going to start with Mr. Anthony Richardson, who looks like he's probably going to miss at least 4 weeks with this shoulder injury. He's going to miss some time. So, looks like an AC joint sprain. Definitely moves up some of these receivers. Somebody like Josh Downs, who has been thriving with Gardner Minshew in the lineup rather than Richardson. So maybe a possible pickup, especially in the second half of the year. If he starts getting more involved in the offense, you could see a blow up there. Daniel Jones hurt yet again, neck injury. Waiting on some more news from that to see what the timetable may be on Daniel Jones missing time. But now with a struggling Giants offense, who do you turn to? I mean, Darren Waller looked like he was doing well last game. Should have had about a 30-yard touchdown this past week. Lets it go through his hands. He's had some drops. They've been tough catches. But usually Darren Waller, the Darren Waller we know in the past, he literally would catch those balls, and that was what made him a top 3 tight end. Not so much anymore. It seems like the difficult catches he's having a little more tougher time with. Doesn't seem like we're getting the action we really wanted out of him coming from New York, especially after we saw in the preseason where, the talk was we had to take Waller out because we wanted Daniel Jones to throw to somebody else. You don't have anybody else. There is nobody else on that team. What is it? Every receiver on there is 5'9" and shorter. It's going to be tough. Daniel Jones, tough time. But now with Tyrod Taylor, what do you see? And Saquon Barkley still being out. So do we get Saquon next week with no Daniel Jones? How does that play out? What's that offense going to look like? Big questions coming out of New York for that one. Justin Jefferson toward the end of that game. We'll talk more about him in a little while, but it looks like he's dealing with a hamstring issue. Was unable to finish that close game there for Minnesota. James Conner, knee injury. He came off the field early. That should be a big one because, listen, he is one of those guys. He was a volume play. If you have him on your team, I'd be really worried. I do have him in one of my leagues, and trust me, I am concerned with this. His whole thing about him getting points was all based on volume. Now, with him not getting volume, is he a drop-off candidate, or do you have to put him on the bench? Who can you pick up? Because now, as a workhorse running back, he's not going to be that until he gets healthy. De'Von Achane looks like he's dealing with some injuries. He's had an explosive game, but he could not finish the game. I think he came out with an injury, did not return. That was where Mostert kind of got his garbage time pickups and was able to get a solid week out of Mostert. But De'Von Achane looks like he's going to be hurt. How is this going to affect him going forward? Does Mostert all of a sudden become a great play again? Interesting news coming out of there. But we will get into our studs of the week, and we'll start off with our top 5 QBs of this week was Justin Jefferson, Jared Allen, Jalen Hurts, Jared Goff, and Sam Howell. Now, some of you know me, I loved Sam Howell this week. I think there was even a play of discussion of who would you go with Sam Howell and C.J. Stroud. I literally went Sam Howell. I know I was kind of the minority in that group, Everybody else was all over C.J. Stroud and him throwing the ball. Listen, I love it. I get it. They are selective with him throwing the ball. And, they like to run, control the clock, work the defense. That is what Houston wants to do. My whole thing was give me the guy who's going to throw the ball 50 times a game, because that's what Sam Howell's going to do. In Eric Bieniemy's offense, that is what he's going to do. So, big game from those guys. It's nice to see Justin Fields on there a back-to-back week. What do you do with Justin Fields going forward? After he finishes out the QB1 for the week, Justin Fields has been an enigma for fantasy football because he's not a very good NFL quarterback, but he is very good for fantasy football, especially when he starts to run the ball. Going forward, if you're in a 2 QB league, of course, you're keeping Justin Fields. He's got too much upside. Now, in a traditional 1 quarterback league, do you try to move him on these huge up weeks? I think you do, and try to get some more pieces depending on what your team looks like. Maybe you need a running back, a lot of injuries coming up. Maybe you need somebody to fill in. Justin Fields could be a guy you'd want to move. The schedule doesn't get easier for him. And as we've seen, he hasn't proven that he could be a consistent high-scoring fantasy player, but he does have a high ceiling. When he scores big. When he scores low, man, it's extreme one way or the other. There is no in-between with Justin Fields. He is not consistent. So do you look at moving him? I think that's all based on your team situation. If you are dire need for a running back or an outside position at wide receiver you shouldn't. There's a lot of great receivers that are available, and it kind of fluxes. But if you're in need for a running back, trading Justin Fields could be the move you make. Justin Hurts, of course, with another big game. He is benefiting from that brotherly shove, play that they run every week. And he hasn't been great, but he has been consistent. He hasn't been anything outrageously great in fantasy football. He has been consistent. I think he's actually a better NFL quarterback this year than he was last year, but the fantasy numbers aren't as extreme as they were last year. So, Jared Goff, beneficial of that 3 touchdown performance. He throws 3 TD passes, gets him up there. Listen, I believe we talked about this in the offseason. I did believe Jared Goff would be a top 10 quarterback. I thought he was possible with the setup and the weapons he has that he could possibly be a top 10 quarterback. And so far, he's on pace to probably get there. So especially the more and more this gels, once they get Amon-Ra St. Brown back and Jameson Williams kind of gets him involved in the offense because he can really stretch the field, open things up for other players, that's only going to help Jared Goff. Next, we're going to get on our running backs. Our running back situation, listen, a lot of guys were surprises on this one. Travis Etienne, number 1 running back on the week. He had a huge week out there in London. It looks like those back-to-back games, Jacksonville looked way better in the second game than they did in the first. And they said they even felt better. Now, everybody knows I'm not a big fan of these London games. We're not going to set a team over there. That's ridiculous. There's no way you're going to ask teams to travel out there every week. Now, I know they're trying to spread football, but do you bring back an NFL Europe again? Because I don't see how this makes any sense. We are not going to establish a team in London or Germany and have teams travel halfway across the world to play a football game. That scheduling conflict on that alone would be such a mess. So I'm curious of where they're trying to go with this, or what the end goal is. Hopefully it's to establish a secondary league somewhere. I get it. They're trying to spread football. Every sport is doing it. Baseball does it. Hockey does it. Football's now doing it. Basketball's doing it. Everybody's trying to spread their brand. I get it. I just don't see how this benefits in the future for regular season games. Like if you did this, mostly everybody does this as exhibition matches, which is understandable. You get guys over to play in the offseason, preseason, whichever, whatnot. They don't usually do it during the season. You're not traveling halfway across the world in any other sport besides football. So I'm curious to see how this goes. But he did look great this week. And it was all big plays because you watch Travis Etienne. He didn't do a whole lot consistency-wise. It was just big plays that got him there. It would be 1 yard in a cloud of dust, 1 yard in a cloud of dust, and then boom, it's a 40-yarder and a touchdown. And that was the day for Travis Etienne. The surprise was Zach Moss. Zach Moss finished number 2 on running back on the week. I know I benched him with Jonathan Taylor coming back and the contract getting signed. I didn't realize it was going to be that explosive. But, man, they really didn't put him out there. They're really going to – I think they're going to work him in slow. So I think you might get another week out of Zach Moss now after seeing what we saw this past week. I was completely wrong on that one. I did not think Zach Moss was going to be that much of an effect. I thought at least it would be a 50-50 split. It wasn't even close. It was like 75-25 in favor of Zach Moss. And Zach Moss capitalized. And I think with this performance, he's going to buy himself another week where he's going to be the majority running back for this team, especially with Anthony Richardson being out. Gardner Minshew is not a running quarterback. This only benefits Moss and Taylor, and especially Moss because you can get a couple more weeks out of him being fantasy relevant. Next was Breece Hall. Listen, all I have to say with that one, they played Denver. Okay, they played Denver. What else is there to say? They played Denver. I mean, he had a great game. Only one tutty, but they played Denver. Okay, going forward, my biggest concern now with this team is game script. Are they going to be behind constantly? Because the defense doesn't look as strong as it did last year. They're very weak against the run game. They struggle against tight ends. People have been able to score on this team. Is the negative game script going to affect Breece Hall going forward? And, of course, you got De'Von Achane, who he had over 100 yards on his third attempt. Like, you can't ask for much more than that, right? 3 attempts, he's over 100-plus yards. But now with the injury going forward, how does this affect De'Von Achane? It looked like they were getting him more and more involved. He did out-touch Raheem Mostert this week with 12 carries. Raheem Mostert only had 11, and that was with De'Von Achane getting hurt and being taken out of the game. So going forward, I definitely believe that Mostert starts to fall off. I think they're going to go younger and go with De'Von. I'm sorry. I apologize. It's Achane, not Achane. I'm still trying to get used to that. But De'Von Achane, going forward, is going to be interesting play, and I think he takes over that number 1 running back role fairly quickly if he is healthy. Now we got to wait to see what the results of this injury is. David Montgomery, huge surprise in this season, but he finishes the week as number 5. He is getting volume. He is getting red zone touches. Everybody who thought this was going to be a 50-50 split with him and Gibbs, it hasn't been so far. Jahmyr Gibbs, you thought he was going to be there on passing downs. He was going to get the ball. They were going to find creative ways to get him the ball. It hasn't turned out that way so far this year. Gibbs did get some touches, more looks when Montgomery was out, but as soon as Montgomery was back, we're right back to it. So, those are your top 5 running backs for the week. Your wide receiver studs on the week, Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase was loud this week about wanting the ball, get me the ball, get me the ball. 15 targets. 15 targets. Man, now that brings it, is Joe Burrow back? He finally had some fantasy relevancy in this week, and all he did was hyper-target Jamar Chase. I think the benefit of that was there was no Tee Higgins. I think you've got too many mouths to feed. I think those guys, because now Tee Higgins wants a new contract. So you know he's going to want to post numbers. Going to be interesting going forward. Going to be interesting. Once Tee Higgins is back in the lineup, what does his target share stay with? Does it stay just hyper-targeting Jamar Chase and only looking at Tee Higgins in the red zone? It's going to be interesting. I think you're going to have some animosity in that room. But the big one, DJ Moore with Justin Fields. It was the DJ Moore, Justin Fields show. I mean, it was throw the ball to DJ Moore and see what he can do. And listen, as Justin Fields is, that's what you have to do. Utilize those. Throw the ball to DJ Moore. Use Cole Kmet. And see where it goes. I mean, your running game now is decimated. I mean, you had 3 running backs get hurt in that Thursday night game. It's going to be the DJ Moore and Justin Fields show. Now, is it going to be successful? Fantasy-wise, I think it could be. As a team, I don't see it that way. As an NFL team, I still think they struggle. They're one-dimensional. They got one guy to shut down. Justin Fields, he's going to have to use his legs more. I mean, that's just all there is to it. Tyreek Hill, big day for him. My concern with Tyreek Hill, That was the smallest snap percentage he's played all season long. Very underwhelming in the snap percentage. Is he dealing with an injury? He's got to be dealing with something because he was not out there as much as you would have liked. In fact, Tyreek Hill was only on the field for 46% of the snaps. Now, his targets were huge. They still kind of stayed in the same range. He had 9 targets, 8 receptions. Of course, the big yardage one, so 181 yards, and he had a tutty. Going forward, though, what's he dealing with? What kind of injuries is he dealing with? It's gonna be interesting to see. He's got Carolina next week, Philly, New England, and the Chiefs, and then he has a bye in Week 10. Still could see some explosiveness from Tyreek Hill. If they continue to use him on this small percentage of snaps, maybe get him rest. I'm curious to see how this is going to affect. Maybe this helps out Jalen Waddle people, because I know everybody was disappointed early in the season with Jalen Waddle. He was underperforming. He has not been that second-tier guy that you thought you were getting, where they were just going to spread the ball to the two of them. Now, with the emergence of De'Von Achane, you haven't seen a lot out of Waddle. His snap percentage has grown. He finally had double-digit targets this past week, but only had 5 receptions. The touchdown kind of saved them and kept him fantasy relevant. But I mean, looking at this season, I know I drafted him in a couple leagues, and it's been very disappointing. And through the first 4 games he's played, remember he missed Week 3 against Denver, which was the juicy matchup. Wide receiver 31, wide receiver 40. Against Buffalo, he was wide receiver 55. And listen, everybody goes, oh, he had a great game. He had a great game. He was still wide receiver 20 this past week. So they haven't been getting him the ball in manifesting ways just like they did early in his career. So he hasn't been getting the touches. So it's going to be concerning. I would be concerned playing Jalen Waddle going forward with Tyreek Hill and Achane and the majority of those weapons. There's just not enough ball going around. And you definitely want to get the ball in the Tyreek Hill hands. So the person that's going to suffer is Jalen Waddle. And unfortunately, I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be touchdown dependent for most of this year unless something changes. Adam Thielen, the old man from Minnesota, has still got it, but he is this year's leading candidate for the ultimate garbage man, because that's where he's getting most of his stuff at, is in garbage time. Listen, though, he is the clear number 1 receiver. At 33 years old, he still has some skill. He doesn't have, the separation like he used to, but he's still a very, very good wide receiver. He's going to rely on touchdowns. He's getting hyper-targeted. He's getting, double-digit targets every week. A lot of it coming in garbage time when they're forced to throw the ball. Unfortunately, that hurts other people like Miles Sanders owners and things of that nature. But nobody else has really emerged from that wide receiving core. I think that they were hoping Mingo was going to get there, and him being hurt and underproducing, I think that's been a huge thing. The wide receiver 5 was George Pickens. Listen, we all love George Pickens. George Pickens is great. He is a phenomenal athlete. We love watching him play. He's a highlight reel waiting to happen. Can you trust, Kenny Petite Hands Pickett? I don't see it. Like, everybody thought he was going to make a jump. He looked good, and I gave credit. I said, man, he looks really good in the preseason. He has looked atrocious during the regular season. He looks lost. Even when he's throwing it up to George Pickens, sometimes it's errant passes. It does not look good. And what doesn't help him is there is no running game. Najee Harris looks bad. He looks like he's 40, for God's sakes. I mean, they used everything he had in him in the first season, apparently. But George Pickens finishes there. You got to keep your eye on that. The consistency is not going to be there. But listen, George Pickens is great to have if he has, say you're in a 3-receiver league. You want that huge upside. He has a very, very small floor. You're waiting for the big play to happen. He's got huge upside, which you're looking for. If you have 2 consistent wide receivers, George Pickens is a great third option, especially with his huge upside. Especially, even if you don't have a 3 wide receiver set in the flex, he's a great option as far as a huge upside because he can win you weeks. Now, you got to be prepared for that low floor that he could end up with, especially with Kenny Pickett being the quarterback in that offense. It is the Steelers' offense. I think, I was talking with my friend in part-time co-host here, Mr. Lee, he's a big Steeler fan, and I know we were kind of looking at the game, and we were watching Red Zone, and he goes, "Man, I haven't seen the Steelers offense yet." And I said, "Well, they don't have one." They really don't. I mean, it's unique going forward, but hey. Tight end wise, listen, actually the tight ends had a week. I usually don't talk about tight ends too much, but they had huge weeks. George Kittle, only 3 catches, but they were all touchdowns. Dallas Goedert finally showed up. Holy smokes, where's that guy been all year? Travis Kelce, he's been consistent, but of course he had to lead with the drama. He gave all the Swifties a scare with that ankle injury. I'm sure everybody was all over Taylor Swift's social media page seeing if she was crying because, my goodness, that was very disturbing for all these Swiftie fans out there. I could not believe the amount of Swiftie jerseys out in the... It's insane. And they're not even for the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, literally, people from Minnesota had Swiftie jerseys. It's unbelievable. It's incredible to watch. I don't understand it. Listen, but hey, I guess it's Taylor Swift's fan base is large and in charge, my friend. But he was a tight end 23. Tight end 3 on the week, followed by Logan Thomas. There's another blast name that, listen, he can have huge weeks here and there. Remember, you're looking at Washington's offense. Sam Howell's going to be throwing the ball a ton. And then, of course, you had Sam Laporta for the Lions. He had a great solid week in the touchdown market. Those guys are your top studs of the week in each position. And listen, a lot of them are pretty consistent. There's some consistent ones in there. A lot of ones that are wild cards that came out of nowhere. But let's look at the duds of the week. And these guys always get those are the Horn Award, as I like to call it. Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith was such a huge letdown this week. And I have him in a few of my leagues. And man, it did not go well for Devontae Smith this week. Devontae Smith, listen, in this year, it's been feast or famine with him. This past week, he had 5 targets, only 1 reception. And that was for 6 yards. And, listen, the last 3 weeks have been really rough for Devontae Smith from a fantasy standpoint. From week 3 to now, wide receiver 77, wide receiver 30, and then this week, wide receiver 97. This is a guy a lot of people were taking 2nd, 3rd round, and to see him just underproduce this way, I know George was big on Devontae Smith outperforming A.J. Brown. It looked like maybe that was going to be the case early in the season. Now it looks like it's completely flipped, and he's not getting a whole lot of looks. Target-wise, he had 9 targets against Washington. Other than that, it's 5. It's pretty consistent at 5. Week 1 was 10. Week 4 was 9. Everything else, 5 targets a week. Now he's got to catch them all because he needs that because he's not getting a huge amount of volume. I mean, you got to think about it this way. If you're looking at somebody to pick up on the waiver, you're looking at guys who get targets. He's not getting there. He's not getting there with the targets he's receiving. I mean, he's got, 34 targets through 5 weeks of play? That's tough. That's tough. That's tough to swallow if you took him high in drafts like most people did. So, going forward, listen, you got to look at Devontae Smith. That whole offense, I'm hoping maybe it's just a learning curve they're going through. It doesn't look as explosive and as fast-paced as it has in the past. So, hopefully they can get this going moving forward and get this corrected and see if Devontae Smith becomes more relevant while keeping A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert involved. But I think the emergence of DeAndre Swift really coming by has really hurt a lot of the receivers because they're just not having to throw the ball as much as they were in past years. The Yeti is on this dud list. I'm worried about Derrick Henry. I know I've always said that he always gets off the slow starts. The Yeti only performs when it's cold outside. And hopefully I think maybe the Tennessee Titans are playing that's literally the heart. Because right now it's a 60-40 split with him and Tajay Spears. Tajay Spears, who's looked good this season, is getting 40% of the snaps. Derrick Henry, listen, I know he had the toe injury. He's getting up there in age. We talked about this. Me and George early in the season talked about how we thought Derrick Henry could see a downfall with his age, the usage he has received in past years. The body can only take so much pain and toll, and it looks like it's starting to have an effect. So curious to see if that stays as a consistent 60-40 split or if it starts going more 50-50 because Tajay Spears has looked really good this year. Curious to see if they're looking at moving forward for him. So next guy on this list is, James Cook. I think you need to be worried if you have James Cook as your running back. I know he looked great in the first couple of weeks of the season, but if you look at his rushing attempts on a weekly basis, it's been declining every week. And he's not getting the looks in the passing game, and he's certainly not getting in the end zone. I would be majorly concerned at James Cook. If you needed to, and trading him was a possibility, trading him while his name is still kind of simmering, still kind of warm, not exactly hot, but warm, and you can get a good deal out of it, somebody who really wants a James Cook and really believes in him, maybe looking at time maybe to move on from a James Cook and see what you can get out there in the market, especially in Dynasty. Looking at where you are in the season, James Cook's not helping your team. Maybe look at getting some young prospects and possible some draft picks. Justin Jefferson, dud week. Listen, we know this happens. He did it last year. I think he's going to be fine. What concerns me is now he has a huge hamstring injury. Unable to finish a game where you are needed most. Listen, I get if it was a blowout and he didn't return. No point in it. You're in this game, and he does not return after tweaking that hamstring. I think that hamstring could be a little more severe than most people are letting on. He only had 6 targets in the game, and now he's injured. People might want to move on Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison might be the next guy up, and you might see some KJ Osborne in there. So if you're looking for a receiver with Jefferson being out, Osborne may be a guy you want to go get if Addison is unavailable, because Osborne could see some time and some volume increase if you need receiver. Devontae Adams last night on Monday Night Football wasn't great. It was not great. He did not look explosive coming off the line. And it looked like the Green Bay Packers knew exactly what the Raiders wanted to do to get him the ball, and they cut that off. And listen, kudos to them. They figured out towards the end where he had the 4 targets. Decent game. And he had great yards per catch average. I mean, it was like 11.6 yards per catch. I wish you would have saw him more involved than what you did. Especially with the running game in Vegas here is really, really kind of struggling. As, listen, the fantasy footballers like to call him. I think coming in the year, I don't think Josh Jacobs was physically prepared. And I think he came in, like they say, he came in as Fat Thor. He is Fat Thor. He's got to get back in shape. We got to get him to that Love and Thunder Thor rather than the Fat Thor from Avengers. So once he gets back there, hopefully that comes back. And remember, he struggled at the beginning of last season too before he blew up. So hopefully they right that ship. But another thing I want to talk about, there was a lot of rivalry games this week. A lot of old school rivalry games, including that Green Bay Raiders one. This is the first time the Raiders have beaten Green Bay since 1987. I mean, that's almost 40 years. So huge win for the Raiders, especially mentally, getting over that hump of never beating the Packers. It was the 20th anniversary of Favre's game of his passing his father and that whole shebang. So great game to watch. Good thing it was on prime time. Turned out to be a close game. Wish there was some more offense. Looked like, it was funny, I'm watching the game, and it looked like the offensive play calling was so bad. It was almost like they kept trying to hand the other team the win. It's like, no, you win it. No, please be my guest. And that is exactly how the offense felt for both those teams. You had the Baltimore-Pittsburgh matchup. That game looked great. That was a great game. I honestly believe if Baltimore had a true number 1 receiver, they would have blown out the Steelers. But that fact is, listen, Pittsburgh does have a number 1 receiver and Baltimore does not. So it's going to be interesting to see how Baltimore goes forward. I know they're passing the ball more, but they still don't have that number one guy, and you're still relying on Mark Andrews to be your number one receiver. Zay Flowers, he has his role. Is it a number one role? I'm not sold on that yet. Could he develop into that? Possibly. But I think, yeah, if they got a solid number one receiver, that team could be dangerous. But until that point, yeah, they could. They should have won that game by 20 instead of losing it. But Pittsburgh's defense, listen, we talked about it. George was high on them in the beginning of the season. So far, they haven't disappointed. They definitely get sacks. They get turnovers. So kudos to him. A good call on the Pittsburgh defense. You know, after he said that, I started looking into it, and I wasn't sleeping on Pittsburgh's defense. They've looked good. And, of course, the big one, Dallas and San Francisco, you know, the 90s rivalry and that whole drama. Yeah, that turned out to be one-sided. Like, I didn't think it was going to be a great rivalry game. Everybody was giving credit to the Cowboys. You can't play the Jets and the Giants every week, Cowboys. I mean, this was a good test for them to really see where they're at because they haven't played really anybody these first few weeks. So, listen, it was a good thing this kind of happened early in the season. Maybe the Cowboys, for all you Cowboy fans, maybe they can get this corrected, move forward, see what goes on. But they just got decimated by the Niners. I mean, and it wasn't even Chris McCaffrey that did it. It was everybody else. The defense was all over it. Dak Prescott looked like the Dak Prescott everybody was worried about with the interceptions. I mean, you have to be. Dak Prescott missed a month out of the season last year and still was tied for the league lead in interceptions. I'm like, wow, you missed 4 games and you're still tied for the league lead in interceptions. That's not a good stat to have. So, kudos to those guys. The Niners decimated the Cowboys. It was completely one-sided. That game, that was interesting to watch. So, and other big news for my friend Nick out there. Your Giants are setting the tone. You are stand-alone, the only team left that has not taken an offensive snap with the lead yet. So, good luck to you, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. So, sorry, man. I think some more rough weeks are in store for you going forward. So, we'll see what happens going forward. Listen, guys, thanks for joining the show. We'll be back later on this week with our picks for some sleepers, some guys to look out for, and we will get into some of our league news and talk some league mates. All right, guys, thanks for joining the show. I'll see you next time. Have a great one.